Hi J-Team students. In preparation for our Ruby Bridges movie tomorrow, you're going to be watching a historical slideshow. Now each slide has a question that goes along with it. So you're going to need your 2-column note sheet, and you're going to be recording the slide number, you're going to be recording the answer to the question, and then also your thoughts and feelings regarding the question or the slide or anything that you hear me say during each slide. So we're going to start with slide 1. So on your sheet of paper that you have that you're taking your notes, you're going to go ahead and write slide 1, and you're going to be listening for who is Ruby Bridges. And you can stop and rewind at any point. All right, so slide 1, who is Ruby Bridges? On November 14th, 1960, 6-year-old Ruby Bridges started first grade at William Frantz Public School in New Orleans. This seemingly ordinary act was, in fact, historic. Ruby and 3 other girls were the first African-American students to integrate all white schools in New Orleans. Ruby was the only African-American student who went to William Frantz Public School. Ruby's world was quite different from the world we live in today. In the South, African-American students and white students went to separate schools because of segregation policies. During the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement was calling attention to the problem of segregation and the broader issues of racism and equality that, under the law, resulted in African Americans being denied basic rights. So here Ruby is, and she's an icon because she is someone who bravely integrated her school. All right, I'm just sliding over to the next slide. Slide 2, what is segregation? And you're going to see a map of the United States. And notice the key right over here talks about states with segregated education. And notice that's orange. So down here, all the states with segregated education, and then here, states that did not have segregated education. So take a look and see where Connecticut is, and see if that was segregated or not. So separating people based on the color of their skin is called segregation. Segregation existed in the United States for decades after slavery ended. Racist laws and policies treated African Americans as second-class citizens and separated African Americans and whites. These types of laws became known as Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws existed in states south of and including Virginia. The term Jim Crow was a rude, uncomplimentary way of referring to black people. All right, let's keep on going to slide 3. Before you do that, though, again, you want to pause and go back to your notes, jot down what was segregation, and then again, thoughts and feelings. All right, slide 3. And actually, this is for slides 3, 4, and 5. You can just put those all in one box in your notes. Segregation affected people's daily lives. For example, African Americans and whites used different water fountains and bathrooms. They had separate waiting rooms and seating sections and public transportation such as buses. Baseball leagues were either all African American or all white. The effect of segregation was to make it seem as though African Americans were inferior to other people. So, describe life during segregation. All right, we just finished 3, 4, and 5, so we're coming up to 6. What is Plessy versus Ferguson? The Jim Crow laws had their legal foundation in Plessy versus Ferguson, the ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1896. This ruling said that dividing citizens by race was constitutional if separate facilities were considered equal. The ruling legalized segregation and introduced the legal idea of separate but equal. So if you're looking at this classroom of students, according to Plessy versus Ferguson, it's separate. You see all African Americans here, but supposedly it was supposed to be equal education, so still separation. Again, answer that question, what is Plessy versus Ferguson? And then jot down your thoughts and feelings. All right, slide 7. What is Brown versus Board of Education? In 1954, the Supreme Court said, in the case Brown versus Board of Education, that separating students by race created educational facilities that were unequal. Therefore, segregation laws and policies violated the 14th Amendment, which prohibits states from denying citizens their civil liberties and equal protection under the law. The rule had the effect of desegregating public schools in the United States. So Brown versus Board of Education What that was desegregating schools. Thurgood Marshall, center in the photo, was the attorney who successfully argued the landmark case against segregation, along with George E. C. Hayes on the left and James Nabrett Jr. to the right. Marshall later became the first African-American justice of the Supreme Court. Again, answer that question. What is Brown versus Board of Ed? And thoughts and feelings. Slides 8 and 9. How did the states react to integration? In parts of the South, state governments refused to enforce the federal ruling. In Virginia, some schools even closed to avoid integration. In 1957 in Arkansas, 9 African-American students integrated the all-white Central High School in Little Rock. Anti-integration protesters surrounded the school, and the governor sent Arkansas State militia to blockade the school, refusing entry to the 9 students. President Eisenhower ordered federal troops to protect Elizabeth Eckford, shown in slide 8, Melba Patillo, and 7 other students who were able to integrate the school. So how did the states react to integration? And your thoughts and feelings. Slide 10, what was the Civil Rights Movement? The Brown versus Board of Education ruling came in the midst of the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement was a mass protest movement across the United States that aimed to stop racial segregation and discrimination of African Americans. The movement reached its peak in the 1950s and 1960s and was characterized by civil disobedience and nonviolent protests, such as boycotts, sit-ins, and marches. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, and other leaders and activists, as well as thousands of ordinary people, took part in these protests. All right, slide 11. Who was Rosa Parks? As a result of her nonviolent resistance to segregation laws in Alabama, Rosa Parks became a civil rights activist and was known as the Mother of the Freedom Movement. On December 1st, 1955, Parks was riding a Montgomery bus home from work. She was seated in the African-American section of the segregated bus. Her seat was in a row closest to the white section of the seating, which was full. When several more passengers boarded the bus driver ordered Parks and 3 other African-American passengers to move back. Parks refused, and the bus driver had her arrested for violating laws. Who was Rosa Parks? Describe the Montgomery bus boycott, slide 12. The arrest of Rosa Parks marked the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott, a 381-day mass protest against the segregated bus system in Montgomery, Alabama. On December 5th, African-American residents stopped using the Montgomery public bus system, causing it to lose 75% of its riders. Impressed by this success, local civil rights leaders encouraged the boycott. They also filed a federal lawsuit against bus segregation. On June 5, 1956, a federal district court decided that segregated bus seating was unconstitutional, which means they didn't agree with segregated bus seating. The Supreme Court agreed in the November of 1956, and buses were legally desegregated on December 20th, 1956. So describe the Montgomery bus boycott. All right, slide 13. This looks familiar. Describe civil obedience and how it relates to the lunch counter sit-ins. Other protests focused on lunch counter and restaurants in the South, which refused for years to serve African American customers. Protesters organized sit-ins during which civil rights activists, both African American and white, gathered in groups to sit at the lunch counter for hours. They were denied service, but took up seats that could have been filled by paying customers. In September 1959, students held a sit-in at Grant's department store in Miami, shown here, that lasted for weeks. The restaurant decided to close rather than to serve African Americans. Activists throughout the South took note of the nonviolent action in Miami and began holding their own sit-ins, including the one at Woolworth Lunch Counter in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960. So stop and describe the civil disobedience and how it relates to the lunch counter sit-ins. Slide 14, why did Ruby's parents choose an all-white school for her? The civil rights movement was growing stronger and laws were changing. By the late 1950s, many schools in the South still had not integrated. Now in kindergarten, Ruby attended an all African-American school. She had friends, she had an African-American teacher. She loved school. Well, then she passed an entrance exam that the Anti-Integration School Board designed so African-American children would fail with the aim of keeping them out of all-white schools. But here is Ruby, and she passed. After the integration ruling and Ruby passed the entrance exam, Ruby's parents had a choice where to send her to school. The NAACP, it's also called the NAACP, encouraged them to send Ruby to an all-white school. They said it would be a better school, and she'd be helping all children by integrating the schools. Ruby's father wasn't so sure his daughter should go. He wanted to protect Ruby from angry people. Ruby's mother, Lucille, however, wanted her daughter to have better opportunities. And eventually, Ruby's parents decided she would go to the William Frantz Elementary. In November 1960, Ruby and 6 other students integrated New Orleans elementary schools. She was the only African-American student at William Frantz Elementary. So again, answering why did Ruby's parents choose this all-white school for her, and your thoughts and feelings. Slide 15, what was the job of the marshals? People in the city of New Orleans were angry that the schools were being forced to integrate, and Judge J. Skelly Wright, the federal judge who ordered the schools to integrate, was worried about student safety. He asked the federal government for U.S. Marshals to protect the students. On her first day of school and for months after, the marshals escorted Ruby into William Frantz Elementary. So again, what was the job of the marshals? Slides 16 and 17. White protesters boycotted the school. What does that mean? Anti-integration protesters lined up outside of Ruby's school. The police kept them behind barricades. In her book, Through My Eyes, Ruby remembers they were very loud, like the city's residents were during Mardi Gras. The protests continued into the spring. Marshals escorted Ruby to school throughout that time. The white protesters also wanted to make sure white families boycotted the school. On Ruby's first day, while parents did come to pull their children out of the integrated school. So white protesters boycotted the school. What does that mean? Slide 18, describe Mrs. Henry. Ruby's teacher, Barbara Henry, was young, white, and from Boston. Ruby had never spent much time with a white person before. Ruby's first grade experience was unique. She was in a classroom all by herself because white parents didn't want their children in a class with an African-American student. Ruby spent all of her time with Mrs. Henry. They became very close. Strong anti-integration protests and rioting in New Orleans died down by the end of the school year. And in second grade, Ruby was in a classroom with other students, including white children. Ruby graduated from William Frantz Elementary School and eventually high school in New Orleans. Today, she gives speeches about the experiences she had during the Civil Rights Movement. So describe Mrs. Henry. Who was she? Slide 19. I Have a Dream was about desegregation continued in the South, and the Civil Rights Movement carried on in the early 1960s. Martin Luther King Jr., the most famous civil rights leader, advocated civil disobedience and nonviolent protests to face racism and discrimination. His most famous speech about racial equality, I Have a Dream, was delivered in Washington, D.C., in 1963. And slide 20. Describe the Civil Rights Act. After years of dedicated effort, the Civil Rights Movement succeeded. On August 6, 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. The law was intended to end racial discrimination under the law by guaranteeing equal voting rights for minorities, prohibiting segregation and discrimination in public places, desegregating public schools and other public facilities, demanding equal employment opportunities for all races and sexes, and outlawing discrimination in the workplace, and giving the Attorney General the right to intervene in certain state court cases concerning the 14th Amendment. In 1965, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, which protected the rights of minorities. These important laws continue to protect equality today. So again, you want to go back to your notes, make sure you have all of the questions answered, make sure you have your thoughts and feelings, and then you're going to go and write 2 paragraphs in a Google Doc. Paragraph 1, write a summary of the events of the slideshow. Be sure to write a topic sentence, main idea sentence, telling your reader what your paragraph is about. Then add we're going to stop there. I actually am going to run out of time. So for the assignment, you're going to go and open a new screencast. All right, thank you.